Back in 2002, one of my cousins and I decided to drive to Sacramento for the Hmong New Year. It was a long, 4-hour drive there, and the tiring thing was that as soon as we got off work, we just headed out. The main point of going there is to check out the girl there and try to get as many phone numbers as we can. It was a full day of fun ball tossing with all kinds of girls, and we took hundreds of pictures of different girls with our handheld camera. Back then, we didn't own or afford a cell phone, so we used a piece of paper to write down the girl's phone number. By the time the new year was about to end, our paper was filled with girls' numbers. On the way home, we were very tired and stopped at every rest stop we could find. While driving on the highway, a random car's bumper fell off and our car hit it. My car swerved and hit the side of the curve, flipping over and hitting other cars. That's all I remember from the incident. I woke up in a hospital with so many pains in my back and arms. I realized we were in a car accident. Then I saw my cousin walking into the room. He looked like he had never been involved in any type of car accident. He walked in with clean clothes and no scratches or bruises, so I thought he got lucky and hadn't been injured like me. He sat next to me and asked if I was okay, and I just laughed and replied, "Yes, I am good." He then helped me sit up and asked if I could walk. I got up and realized my legs weren't in any pain, just my back and arms. So we walked out of the room, and the strange thing was that there was no one in the hospital. We walked past every section of the room and hallway, but there was no one. I asked him why there was no one there, and he just smiled and said, "Let's go home." I just nodded. We walked past all the entries and out to the main door. When we walked out of the hospital, there were cars parked in the parking lot, but I couldn't see anyone, as if the place was abandoned. I then told my cousin that my back was hurting and I wanted to rest for a bit. So he held me and walked to a tree nearby the parking lot and sat with me. As I was sitting, I lay down on the grass and closed my eyes and rested. I passed out and it felt like eternity. I was awoken by 2 security officers. They asked me tons of questions and took me back into the hospital. It was so strange that there were lots of people in the hospital this time. I realized when my cousin took me out that I saw no one. The 2 security carried me to a room and told me that the doctor would be with me soon. 2 doctors came into the room and closed the door. They asked me how I got out of the hospital. I told them that my cousin had come into the room and was going to take me home. The doctor asked for my cousin's name and asked if it was the same person that was in the car with me during the accident. I said yes, and they just looked at each other. They said in a soft voice, "But sorry, your cousin has passed away, and he died instantly in the car accident." My heart dropped and I told them it was impossible because he was just with me earlier and held me out of the hospital. Then they told me that by looking at the camera footage they never saw me walk out of my room or hospital. So they have no idea how I just ended up sleeping under a tree outside. The 2 doctors calmed me down and told me to get a lot of rest. My family drove over to the hospital to visit me and took me home. My mom said that maybe my cousin's spirit was trying to take me with him, but it's a good thing I stopped to rest at the tree. 20 years later, I was still wondering what would happen to me if I walked away with my cousin. I was on a night out with a bunch of friends. It was a fun night, with a lot of drinking and chatting. But we got so drunk that I fell down and broke my arm. I broke my arm, but when I fell, a piece of metal pierced through my arms, forcing me to go to the hospital that night because the pain was excruciating. I had to stay the night there to heal. I told my friends to come pick me up the next day when I called them. After a heartfelt and joking farewell, we parted ways. I was still kind of drunk, so I did not remember clearly what happened in the conversation with the nurses and doctors. All I clearly remembered was that the doctor told me to have a good night's rest and that I would feel much better when I woke up. When the nurse was about to call it a night, I suddenly asked her what that person outside was doing. I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway, just standing there and knocking her head on the hallway repeatedly. I told the nurse what I saw, and she turned to look in the direction I was pointing to. But she turned back to me with a confused face, saying that she didn't see anything. I could still see the person, but then after the nurse told me that, the woman suddenly stopped, turned around, and moved away slowly out of my sight. I told the nurse that the woman was moving away now, but when the nurse turned to look again, she still didn't see anything. She told me that maybe I was just too drunk and I was seeing things. As I was thinking about that, I thought what she said made sense. It was the only logical explanation, so I just told her to have a good night. The nurse turned off the light and went out. Hospitals were so quiet at night. It was quite peaceful. I turned on my phone to search the net for a while, but when my headache became too much for me to deal with, I turned off the phone and went to sleep. I hadn't even fallen asleep when I heard thumping, like someone was knocking their head on the wall repeatedly. That made me pause, and I remember what I saw with the nurse. I slowly looked out into the hallway, and there it was again, the same woman standing at the same spot, knocking on the wall with her head. Feeling brave from the beers, I yelled out to her to ask if I could help her. That was a big mistake. The moment I said that, she suddenly froze and then snapped her head to look at me. She waved her hands at me, as if asking me to go to her. I told her that I was too dizzy to move, so she stopped waving her hands and just stood there, looking at me without making any more movement. I thought that was weird, but when she didn't move at all, my headache came back and I closed my eyes. After a long while, I woke up again. I looked at my phone and it turned out I had fallen asleep for 3 hours. I was about to go back to sleep when my eyes scanned the hallway and it made my goosebumps come out. The woman was still standing there, looking at me. It suddenly clicked in my mind that maybe she was not a human. After that thought, I just covered myself up and refused to look at her. I couldn't fall asleep, so I decided to take a peek outside again. This time, though, I felt something was off. The woman was still standing, but this time she was standing a bit closer. I pulled back the blanket. I decided to peek again soon after that, but then the woman was even closer. This time I did not have the gut to do a peek again, so I just lay there without moving a muscle. I kept thinking that the woman would come running into my room. That night, I lay there with only that thought in my mind. I didn't go to sleep at all, and when morning came, I jumped out of bed so fast and just ran out of there. I called my friends, and when they picked me up, I told them all about what happened. I was so tired that I went to one of my friends' houses and slept there for the night. This happened during COVID-19, so if you are sick for whatever reason, no one can visit you in the hospital. One day, I kept coughing and getting sick, so I had to check myself into the hospital. It turned out I was positive for COVID, so I had to spend the night there. My section of the hospital was very quiet, and no one could visit you, so my family couldn't come see me. In the midst of being asleep, I suddenly woke up to the noise of someone dragging their feet against the ground as they were walking. It took me a couple of seconds to clear my eyes, and when I looked around, I couldn't see anything. The door to my room was opened, and outside was quiet and devoid of any movement. There was a light on the right side of the hallway, so I could still see out. I laid back down to go to sleep, and started counting sheep as a way to get to sleep faster. When I mentally counted to 49, I heard the sound again. I opened my eyes again and listened very intently. There it was, the sound of footsteps coming closer and closer with every step. I thought it was a nurse, so I was about to go back to sleep when I saw the shadow slowly coming into view. The movement of the shadow was not smooth. It was like someone was dragging their feet for a couple of steps, paused, shook their body very fast for a few seconds, and continued walking. At that moment, I just knew right then that it was not a nurse, and at this time of night, only two possibilities existed. One, if it was a crazy person who somehow wandered into the hallway, and two, it was not human. Right after that thought came into my mind, I could hear what sounded like a moan and a gasp from the hallway, as if something was trying hard to breathe but couldn't. The shadow then fell down. I looked at it while holding my breath and trying not to breathe. When I couldn't hold my breath any longer, I started to exhale very slowly so as to not make a loud noise. But when I did that, the moment I finished exhaling, the shadow suddenly stood up and started walking again towards me. I got so scared that I tried to lean my body as far back into the bed as I could and pulled the blanket up to cover my face. I thought by doing so, it would go away, but then I heard the movement again, and this time I knew that it was standing right inside my room. I could hear the gasp of the ghost as it was trying to breathe, and then the gasps came closer and closer. When it was right next to me, I shut my eyes as tightly as I could and just hoped nothing else would happen. Then the gasping became worse, and it seemed like the ghost would suffer a heart attack. I thought it would never end, and then, all of a sudden, it just went quiet. It was dead silent. I listened very carefully, but I couldn't hear anything again. Still, I couldn't make myself pull the blanket off to look out in case it was still there. I just lay there, not making any noise at all. Even after a while, when I started to feel uncomfortable, I still didn't move a muscle at all. After what seemed to be an eternity, I was finally about to move again when I suddenly felt someone breathing on top of me. That made me freeze so fast that I thought my heart would stop. It kept breathing on my face without stopping. Then it stopped, and nothing more happened. I did not move a muscle at all that night. Sometimes later on, I fell asleep, and when I woke up again, I could hear the nurses going about their business. I was so relieved that I did not pull up the blanket. I'm not sure what happened, but thankfully I was discharged that day. I don't know if I could spend another night there.